What if I said you were fertilizing your lawn wrong this whole time? Well, I have a list of 5 things that you may be doing wrong with your fertilizer. So let's get into it. Number 1 is over-fertilizing your lawn. So a lot of people think more fertilizer the better, right? Well, that's wrong. More fertilizer at one time can cause burning. So especially if it's a high nitrogen fertilizer, which is what I'm using right now. This is a high nitrogen fertilizer that we put out in the springtime to really just get the grass going, right? This is just going to get the grass growing. It's going to turn it green. But you have to be very careful with this to not over fertilize. I get asked all the time by my customers to just fertilize it heavy over there in that one spot. Well, fertilizing it heavy, putting out more fertilizer is not the answer. That's just going to burn the grass up and cause that grass to suffer even more. So it's a common question I get in shaded areas like this. So you see here where the Bermuda grass, and now there's also some weeds in here, but this Bermuda grass is growing pretty healthy here in the full sun. But once you start getting up here under this tree line here, it thins out, turns into moss, and then of course you have some tree roots here creeping in. So a common mistake that people make is just applying too much fertilizer. Well, applying too much fertilizer is just going to end up putting too much nitrogen out, which is going to cause burning. And when I say burning, it's just going to cause tip burn, which means make the top tips of the grass turn orange, and you could possibly kill your grass at the same time. So you always want to read the label of whatever fertilizer you're using and put out the correct amount of fertilizer. So whether that's 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet or 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Every fertilizer spreader, every spreader has this little gauge right here. No matter what kind of spreader you use, it's going to have some sort of gauge. If I leave it all the way open right there, that's just going to open the hopper, open the little holes. You can't see the holes in the hopper now, but that's going to open them up all the way. So you want to keep it around 14, 15, or 16, just depending on how much fertilizer you want to put out. So knowing the square footage of your lawn is very important when you're putting out fertilizer because you don't want to put out too much. So another mistake that people make when fertilizing their lawn is using the wrong type of fertilizer. So you may be using, well, let's just say you go to a box store and you buy some fertilizer. Well, a lot of that fertilizer that you find in the box stores are mixed. It's like a weed and feed. It's mixed. It could be mixed with pre-emergent. This fertilizer could be coated in a pre-emergent. Well, if you have a lawn service that applies pre-emergent for you, or maybe you do it yourself. Maybe you applied pre-emergent throughout the fall and winter, and now it's time to start fertilizing. So you want to be careful at buying that fertilizer that has pre-emergent and weed control coated on it, because if you have applied your pre-emergent already, you don't want to double dose it. You don't want to put too much pre-emergent down in a calendar year. So you're going to end up causing damage to your lawn by putting out too much pre-emergent. But it's too late for pre-emergent anyway. If you're talking about fertilizer, we're talking about spring and summer right now. You should have already got your pre-emergent done. So be careful when you're buying that type of fertilizer that has pre-emergent that's coated around it. You may also be tempted to buy some fertilizer that is for nurseries. It's usually lower in nitrogen, right? So the fertilizer that you put on trees and shrubs and things like that, it has a lower nitrogen, which is fine for the shrubs, but it's just not a good enough formulation for your grass. You really want a higher nitrogen fertilizer for your lawn to wake it up in the spring and to really get it growing and to get it greened up. But again, be careful with your nitrogen. You don't want to put too much nitrogen down at one time. And you don't want to be fertilizing every week, okay? So if you put out a fertilizer application, you really don't need another one for another month, maybe even 2 months. Every lawn's going to be different, so you just eyeball it, right? You just look at your lawn. If it looks like it has some nutrient deficiency, then you can put some fertilizer down, but don't fertilize every single week. It doesn't need it. You're going to damage your lawn by doing that. And you certainly do not want to put a high nitrogen fertilizer on your shrubs, so don't go in that direction, okay? Don't put a bag of fertilizer that's just straight nitrogen, like 30-0-0 on your shrubs. You're gonna kill those shrubs. That's too much nitrogen for your bushes. The third mistake that I see a lot of people make when they're applying fertilizer is not watering in your fertilizer. So this is a very important step, and I think I probably should have put this as number one. I think this is the number one reason why fertilizer doesn't work, and you're not watering it in properly. Now let's talk about drought, okay? What if we're in a drought? What if we're in the middle of July and it's hot, it's 95 degrees. I live here in Alabama and we have extreme heat in the summers. So should you fertilize your yard if we have not gotten any significant rainfall, if we're in a drought and it's 95 degrees? Well, it depends on how much you're watering. You really just want to look at your lawn. If it is in drought stress, if it has obvious drought stress, then you do not need to put fertilizer on that, because you're going to end up stressing it even more. So I would just, as a general rule of thumb, I would stay away from fertilizing if you're in a drought. If we have not had significant rainfall in weeks or months, just stay away from fertilizer, period. So you're going to end up burning it more. You're going to cause more stress to the roots of the grass. It's not going to react well at all to the fertilizer, and you're just doing more damage than it's worth. So the greening doesn't happen overnight. I get questions sometimes the day after I fertilize a lawn. They're like, why is my yard not green? Well, there's a process that has to take place in the soil before the grass can turn green. Especially if it's a granular fertilizer, right? You have to water that in. Once the fertilizer is dissolved, it has to get to the root system of the grass. Then the roots have to take in that fertilizer before it starts to grow. And then the grass blades itself are not just going to turn green, right? So it's got to produce new growth. You're going to end up mowing out that brown grass. And so, expect 2 to 3 weeks. And it just depends on how fast your grass grows. If it's in the shade, it's going to grow a little slower. So just make sure you water in your fertilizer and give it some time. Give it 2 to 3 weeks before you start to see any results from that. The next mistake that I see people doing with fertilizer is just using the wrong equipment. So this is a good example of a really good push spreader, and it's a Lesco brand. Okay, this is just a heavy-duty Lesco push spreader. You cannot get this from Lowe's or Home Depot. If you go there, you're going to find the smaller spreaders that are going to be a lot shorter than this. They'll probably come up to here. Now this Lesco has rubber tires. You just fill it. It's just like a regular tire. You fill it with air. Now the spreaders that you get from the box stores are probably going to come with some plastic tires, and the inside of the tires are most likely going to be hollow. And what happens with those spreaders, when you're using it, those hollow areas in the tires, they fill up with fertilizer. And then as you're pushing your spreader around your yard, that fertilizer falls out of those hollow areas of the wheels, and then you end up spreading your fertilizer unevenly, or you end up just dropping that in straight lines through your yard, and then you're going to just create streaks in your yard. So I'm all about saving money. I'm all about being budget friendly, but you really don't want to skimp on a good spreader. So I would probably stay away from those cheap spreaders from the box stores and invest in a really good push spreader like this Lesco brand right here. Now, I'm not dogging Scott's at all. Scott's, they're the one that makes the push spreaders that I was just mentioning, but they do make really good hand spreaders. I use this all the time in those harder to get to areas. So let's just say I'm fertilizing a yard and they have some terraces that go up to a hard to get to area. Well, using a little hand spreader like this is a great option for that. But you still want to be careful using these hand spreaders like this. They do a good job of spreading your fertilizer evenly, but you want to be careful. There's obviously no lid on this. I do have a cover for this push spreader. I just took it off for this video. But these hand spreaders, they don't have a cover. So if you step in a hole while you're fertilizing your yard and you trip, you're just going to end up dumping this out into your yard, and you'll have a big pile of fertilizer. And of course, if you do that, you want to try to pick it up, but it's impossible. You're never going to get all of those granules up. So you're going to have a burn spot. You're going to have a little dead spot there in your yard. So although these are great hand spreaders, just be careful not to tip over and let an excess amount fall out of the top of that. The next mistake that people make is fertilizing at the wrong time. Earlier I mentioned fertilizing in a drought, okay? So you want to avoid that. That is the wrong time to fertilize your yard. So wait for some good rainfall if you're unable to water in, if you don't have an irrigation system or anything like that. Wait for some rainfall. Another time of year that you do not want to be fertilizing, and this is for those of us with warm season turf grass. I live in the south here, so we deal with Bermuda, zoysia, St. Augustine, centipede grass. So for us, our growing season is spring and summer. So you want to avoid fertilizing your yard in the wintertime. Our grass goes dormant here. It goes dormant in the wintertime. So you're really just wasting your product by fertilizing in the winter. But you may also, if you do fertilize your grass while it's dormant in the middle of winter, that grass is going to think that you're trying to green it up. It's going to think that you're trying to make it grow. Even though it's dormant, it may wake up accidentally. You don't want to do this, because then the next frost you get is going to put it in shock mode. It's just going to go into shock. It's going to be confused whether or not you want it to grow or not grow. So avoid putting fertilizer out when your grass is dormant in the wintertime. So in conclusion here, your soil needs moisture. If you're fertilizing your yard, make sure your soil is moist, make sure it has a lot of moisture in the ground. So I really appreciate you watching this video. If you found value in this, please consider subscribing to the channel and share this with whoever you think needs some help with fertilizing their lawn. Thanks for watching.